To introduce our next text, Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx, we can go right away to our very first question. What's there? It seems pretty simple at the outset. We have a simple title, Brokeback Mountain. An author, Annie Proulx, interestingly enough, a woman writer. And even more interesting to some of you, a woman writer who was born in the 40s herself, was married and divorced twice, a grandmother of several grandchildren. So it was written originally in 1997, published as a short story in the periodical The New Yorker. And it was set in the years 1963 to 1983. She's very specific about giving us an actual date and giving us references to historical actions of the time. The Thresher incident, the sinking of an atomic submarine was in their conversation and in their discourse the very first summer they spent together on the mountain. So anytime there's a date in the text itself, authors are inviting us to think about what's the relationship between the narrative information of the story and the real life historical information that's going out in the world. That piques a curiosity, piques a question for us to think about later. We could call the genre short fiction. And what's the story about in the simplest way? Well, it's a story about two sheep herders, two 20-year-old rural sheep herders, somehow getting together but not getting together. And one of them dies. So there we have a very easy and quick overview with our first question, what's there? And as you're reading the text this week and rereading the text, I want you to keep all of these dimensions that our class has been talking about in the forefront of your mind. You, of course, will be looking interested in the nature imagery in the text. Interested about moments that are textually intense. How in this short fiction do we find intensity constructed and represented? What about morality? Is there right and wrong, good and bad in this text? And what are the different ways we might look at moral and immoral actions? What scenes, what characters, who is judging who, when, and how? Discernment. How do these people decide about each other? How do they know that they're friends or lovers or mates for life or not? Where are the issues, the challenges of choosing that make up this question of discernment? What about issues of identity? Knowing who you are, what you're about, how do those impact, in this case quite tragically, the events that happen? So we have nature, morality, discernment, identity. We have issues of time and history. One of the complexities of this text is how, even though there's a very clear 20-year time frame, there's a lot of jumping back and forth, a lot of flashbacks, a lot of circle backs. We don't really learn the information that we need in an orderly sequence. It bounces us around a little bit. So how are time and history, what's the relationship of the narrative world to the real historical world? And then last but not least, there's this issue of representation. How do we express ourselves? What happens when we don't? What are the challenges of representation? Specifically, very interesting in this text is the language of the characters, Ennis and Jack, the kinds of words they use, and the language of the narrator, the omniscient narrator, the descriptions, the imagery, the figures that are used in that voice describing the world of Brokeback Mountain and the characters with it. There's a huge, challenging difference between the diction of the narrator and the diction of the characters. So those are things that I want you to keep your eyes attuned to, keep your ears awake for as you're reading through this text. And we'll be looking at those other questions, what's difficult, what's interesting, and so what, later this week as the videos come up. Have a good read.